AIDS brings a response
Fight
from the
against
government.
AIDS, the disease which claims life.
Welcome to AIDS The Lost Voices with me, William Hampson. In this series, we uncover the hidden history of people living with AIDS behind bars, prisoners who unwittingly became activists calling for reform within prison walls. We turn to the newspaper archives to look back at this neglected chapter of the AIDS crisis and the courageous struggle to change an unjust system. In this episode, we examine not only prison life for people diagnosed with AIDS, but the grim continuity of confinement beyond the walls of their prison cell. Hospital wards where patients were, and still are if recent years are to go by, kept chained and shackled. It might seem obvious that someone so ill would pose little or no security risk, yet, as the cases collected here show, detainees with advanced AIDS were routinely restrained, chained or handcuffed to escorting officers or hospital beds, sometimes around the clock, long after any plausible threat, if any existed in the first instance, had ceased, raising urgent questions about dignity, medical ethics, and the criminal justice system's response to serious disease. And this first set of articles from 1991 makes for an unsettling read, as it takes up the entire front page of the Manchester Evening News, where on the 26th of September 1991, they ran the headline, "Jail kept HIV man on chain," where, they report, an HIV prisoner was paraded on an 8-foot chain in front of other inmates and officers. He was treated like an animal on a leash during closet chaining at a Staffordshire jail, and other prisoners have a similar regime, an AIDS summit in Manchester was told today. In Kent, an inmate had to eat his meals off a paper plate labelled AIDS. He could only shower after others had finished, then the showers were disinfected. His toiletries, also labelled with his name and the word AIDS, were kept separate. The Conference on AIDS and HIV and Civil Liberties was told by Andrew Pudfat, General Secretary of Liberty, that the practice of chaining started in 1987, quote, and is still going on, as far as I know, end quote. He learned about it from a Stafford prisoner, who wrote, quote, when I am being taken to hospital for treatment, I am handcuffed to 8 feet of chain, the other end of which is attached to an escorting officer. I am then paraded through the hospital like an animal on a leash, end quote. When Liberty, formerly the National Council for Civil Liberties, protested to the prison, the head of custody wrote back saying the practice of chaining, quote, should be carried out with some discretion in public places. A spokesman for the Prison Officers Association at Stafford said the closet chain was a means of making sure prisoners did not escape when they went to the lavatory. They were not for the exclusive restraint of AIDS sufferers, but, he added, quote, in the past, where prison officers have quite understandably not wanted to be close handcuffed to prisoners with advanced AIDS, closet chains have been used during transfer to hospital. But you should just see the actions of nurses. They use screens like you've never seen before, end quote. Oh gosh, isn't it equally as shocking that this is 1991 and there's still this paranoia, this belief, this stigma that, handcuffing yourself with traditional handcuffs to a prisoner with advanced AIDS, as they call it, that perhaps, their hands touching, or I suppose the fact that they're in a vicinity of being able to breathe in the same air as them, that they're going to catch AIDS. It's just ridiculous. Anyhow, the article goes on. The conference, attended by Judge Stephen Tumin, HM, which would have then been Her Majesty's Chief Inspector of Prisons, also heard from Di Harris of the Terence Higgins Trust. This afternoon, Manchester's Strangeways prison confirmed that chains allow prisoners to use an outside toilet in privacy. They had not been used on AIDS sufferers, quote, but we cannot speak for other establishments, end quote. That is the article. That's how it ends a bit. I think they just threw in a load of crap at the end, and just couldn't bother quoting or citing or giving us a little bit of deeper insight. 'Cause I would have loved to have heard the response from the Judge Stephen Tumin, the Terence Higgins Trust, and I don't know how Strangeways came into it. Anyhow, moving on. Because on the following day, on the 27th of September 1991, Stoke-on-Trent's Evening Sentinel gave additional insight in regards to that Stafford prisoner that was talking about being on the chain, being on the leash, while going to hospital, where, they report, Mr. Pudfat said, quote, "It is totally unacceptable. Being attached to the chain was a condition of him receiving treatment outside the prison gates." End quote. Mr. Clem Norman, head of residential services at the jail, said the only reason handcuffs or chains were used would be as a security measure. The closet chain was about 1 meter long and was used to allow prisoners privacy when using the toilet. Quote, "We have a very positive attitude towards AIDS and we are working towards full integration of prisoners with AIDS and other inmates. If this is genuine, then it would only have been done for security reasons and no other reason." End quote. He denied the practice was written into the manual. Quote, "It is a very negative statement. We hope it will not damage the positive attitude both staff and prisoners have towards the problem," he added. But the Guardian newspaper, the very same day, ended their article on this story with, quote, "The Home Office last night denied it had ever been policy at Stafford to closet chain AIDS prisoners, but in a letter to Liberty's legal officer, dated the 2nd of April 1990, Mr. C.R. Davidson, then head of custody at the Goal, the prison, confirmed the use of the chains." End quote. So someone's telling porkies because they're both contradicting themselves. Anyhow, I couldn't find any press reports of closet chains being used to restrain prisoners taken to hospital outside the prison perimeter for AIDS-related illnesses between 1987 and 1990. But the absence of media coverage does not mean it did not happen, as we've just heard from one prisoner who testified via his letter to Liberty, though there wasn't enough information in that letter or the newspaper articles for me to identify the man or trace what happened to him next. The fact that he spoke up in his letter stands as a testament to the capacity of someone behind bars using their voice to advocate for change. But I did find in New York City's Daily News newspaper the headline, "Chained Despite Her AIDS," where on the 8th of October 1987 they reported, "During the last week of her life, a woman convicted of drug possession was granted her final wish by her jailers. They took the chains off her AIDS-emaciated body for the first time in 4 months." The decision, prompted by complaints from the Legal Aid Society, was a concession for the Department of Correction and the Health and Hospitals Corp, which routinely chain hospitalized women inmates and some male prisoners to their beds to keep them from escaping. At £85, that's a little over 6 stone, the 28-year-old woman, quote, "could barely move," end quote, said legal aid attorney Jonathan Chasen. After learning a priest had visited the woman at City Hospital Centre at Elmhurst Hospital to administer last rites, advocates convinced city officials to release the woman from her chains 1 week before she died, on August the 13th, 1987. 6 years after filing a lawsuit against the city to limit the shackling of sick inmates, legal aid and city officials say they are close to an out-of-court agreement that will result in at least some inmates not being chained. Currently, inmates are not chained if they are held in a barred, secured prison ward at Elmhurst, Kings County, and Bellevue hospitals. Since no hospital prison ward exists for women, female inmates are taken to Elmhurst, where they can be chained. Any men not held in a prison ward also are shackled. Board of Correction Chairman Robert Kasanoff said he has ordered an investigation of the practice and added the department faced, quote, "a very grave problem of legality," end quote. If it could be shown, female inmates receive significantly different treatment from the men. Charging the policy is humiliating and even painful. Legal aid has sought to exempt from shackling inmates who are low risk or who cannot walk for medical reasons. Society lawyers cited cases of inmates who were forced to defecate in their beds because correction officers, who watched the hospitalized prisoners around the clock, would not unchain them so they could go to the bathroom. One woman who had just given birth was chained to her bed as she held her baby and had been unshackled only during labour, Chasen said. Another patient, dying of AIDS, had deteriorated so much that the chains had to be put around her wrists because her ankles were too thin, he said. But the Department of Corrections said the chains were needed to keep inmates from running away or hurting other patients. Quote, Security is definitely necessary for everybody's protection, said spokesman Ruby Riles. She added that physicians may order the chains removed if it is medically warranted. Oh, that poor woman. And age shouldn't really come into it because it doesn't matter how old you are. Being chained up when you've got an AIDS diagnosis, and in 1987 there, as we heard, you're looking deaf in the face and the priest has come and read you your last rites and you're chained to the bed. And then only then your chains are removed. I mean, it's just ridiculous, isn't it? But I think these stories are elements of the AIDS pandemic that have been forgotten or are deliberately overlooked. They appear in the newspapers, obviously. People were talking about it because it was reported. But once you've read the newspaper, what happens? The newspaper gets discarded and the individual just gets forgotten. And given many said, especially during the AIDS pandemic and even retrospectively, that America led the way and we here in the United Kingdom often followed by a couple of years, it's striking that in 1987, as we just heard there, that the United States at least is starting to look at the restricting or the withdrawal of the use of chains and shackles on inmates when receiving hospital treatment, while here in the UK as late as 1991, as we heard of the Stafford prisoner who was being closet chained while being treated for AIDS-related illness in a hospital. So it came as a bit of a surprise that 5 years after the report surfaced of that Stafford male prisoner being chained while hospitalised for AIDS-related illnesses in 1991, that in the year 1996 would see an even bigger scandal when the tabloid newspaper, the Daily Mirror, exposed what it called the Mums in Chains affair, a catalogue of women inmates either shackled to hospital beds or escorted in chains by officers while receiving cancer treatment or even giving birth. And the revelations by the tabloid newspaper ignited national outrage. It prompted parliamentary inquiries, urgent questions, urgent reviews of custodial health care, and forced a painful re-examination of the balance between security imperatives and the basic dignity owed to vulnerable prisoners, particularly those undergoing serious medical care or childbirth. And in true tabloid fashion, all their coverage was accompanied by photographs of prisoners, predominantly women in hospital gowns, sometimes chained to their beds or escorting prison officers, where the Daily Mirror, on the 11th of December 1995, ran the exclusive. A pregnant woman serving a jail term was kept chained like a dog in hospital 24 hours a day. These shocking pictures, taken by a relative, show her ordeal, condemned last night as, quote, like something from the Middle Ages, end quote. Mother of three, Kathleen McKay, 27, was handcuffed to a prison warder on a chain 10 foot long and stayed manacled while playing with her little nephew. Kathleen, a convicted shoplifter and drug user, was taken to Whittington Hospital, North London, from nearby Holloway Jail when she feared her labour pains had started. In a phone call from the ward, Kathleen told the Daily Mirror, quote, "Nobody deserves to be treated like this. I'm in agony and doctors say there could be a problem with the baby. What do they think I'm going to do? Run away in my condition and with 3 other children at home? It is just obscene. The handcuffs cut into my wrists and the chain is very heavy. There are 2 warders with me all the time. If I go to the loo or for a bath, the woman warder has to come with me. I feel like a dog on a lead, but even dogs don't sleep with their chains on." The Home Office says it is standard for inmates of closed prisons, male and female, to be handcuffed constantly while under escort. A stay in hospital qualifies as under escort. A spokeswoman said, quote, "The handcuffs would be removed only if a midwife or doctor requested it," end quote. The Liberty Group, which campaigns over civil liberties, said, quote, "It is cruel and unjustifiable that a pregnant woman in pain should be constantly handcuffed. It is like something from the Middle Ages and should be stopped," end quote. Labour peer Helen Hayman, chairwoman of Whittington, has asked the government for talks over handcuffing of prisoners. And with Conservative Prime Minister John Major at the helm at the time, the fallout from the Daily Mirror's additional 2-page spread on the 30th of December 1995, in which then MP Emma Nicholson, who represented Devon West and Torridge, was quoted as saying, "I believe that the final straw for me was actually expectant women in Holloway prison shackled in chains," which precipitated her defection from the Conservative Party to the Liberal Democrats, exposing deep unease not only within the party but across Parliament. Then, by the 6th of January 1996, and what had started as a exclusive in the Daily Mirror newspaper is rapidly being picked up by the broadsheets, the Telegraph, the Guardian and the Independent, until the story dominates the national conversation. Channel 4 News then broadcasts secretly recorded footage from Whittington Hospital showing a Holloway inmate, identified only as Annette, shackled to an officer while said to be in labour, and an hour after giving birth, she's filmed walking in her hospital gown, chained to a guard down the hospital ward, prompting outrage, urgent calls for investigations into custodial maternity practice, and renewed scrutiny of the treatment of women in the prison system. Then, 4 days later, on the 10th of January 1996, the Daily Mirror published more photographs showing more inmates in chains while in hospital and reported remarks made in Parliament by the then prison minister, Anne Widdecombe, who defended the practice of using chains and shackles on all prisoners in hospital. Anne Widdecombe maintained that restraints were necessary, but said they were expected, in the case of women, to be removed once labour began. She added that an official form needed to be completed to document when chains were taken off and subsequently replaced, and this had been done on the women who had been reported in the press so far. And I tried to find footage of Anne Widdecombe answering these urgent questions or making these statements in Parliament, but I couldn't find them. But I think for those of us that know Anne Widdecombe, we can just hear her voice and we would know how defensive she would have been.
And I think that what we're doing, or what the prison service has done, is to send out a terrible signal. The majority of people who come into our prisons are on drugs. A lot of people come in with a seriously established drugs habit. What message does this send to them? That they're entitled to prescribe their own treatment, presumably? I mean, come on.
And hence why it didn't particularly go down well. But the point of me mentioning this rough outline of these mothers in chains, which then became a campaign by the Daily Mirror newspaper, is because the Independent newspaper is one of the first to report on the 14th of January 1996 a concerning case under the headline, "Chained Night and Day, the Prisoner with HIV," where they report. Her face, a jaundiced yellow. Jane lies on her hospital bed, flanked by 2 prison officers, and chained by her wrist to one of them. Jane is HIV positive and is in the specialist AIDS unit in St Mary's Hospital in West London, with suspected forms of related illnesses, including hepatitis. She is also an inmate of Holloway Jail in North London, the latest seriously ill or pregnant woman to find herself forced to wear shackles while receiving hospital treatment. Day and night, 24 hours a day, Jane remains shackled to an officer. Warders wrap her chains in a jacket or scarf at night to stop the rattling and enable her to sleep. The chain is long enough to pass under a lavatory door, affording some degree of privacy. When she leaves her room in the hospital, officers cover their uniform lapels in an attempt not to draw attention. But, says Jane from her hospital bed, quote, "the rattling of the chains means people can hear me coming a mile away," end quote. The use of shackles in hospital, which has provoked furious protests from human rights, health and women's groups, has caused prison inspectors to walk out of Holloway in protest and MP Emma Nicholson to leave the Conservative Party. But what is even more alarming in Jane's case is that she has not been convicted of any offence, nor has she any previous convictions. She was in Holloway on remand, awaiting trial for drug offences. An addict herself, she is accused of conspiracy to supply heroin. Tomorrow, lawyers acting for Jane will make an emergency application for bail, which would enable her to receive treatment in St Mary's free of manacles and chains and the presence of prison officers. Shackling was introduced last April, following the embarrassing escapes of 8 dangerous men, including 5 IRA terrorists, from Whitemoor and Parkhurst top security prisons. But the policy does not discriminate between an IRA murderer or an armed robber and a woman in jail for, say, petty theft. It was highlighted by the dramatic walkout from Holloway last month by prison inspectors. They were disgusted by squalid conditions and, quote, overzealous security, end quote, affecting the treatment of women prisoners. Some had been shackled to male prison officers during antenatal checks. Others had been chained during the early stages of labour. Former Tory MP Emma Nicholson said the shackling was a last straw that persuaded her to defect to the Liberal Democrats. For Jane, the idea that she might try to escape is laughable. She is in the best place to treat her condition and its complications. Furthermore, a walk through the hospital on Friday for a breath of fresh air left her gasping for her inhaler and prompted a return to bed. Yesterday, an official for Holloway Prison refused to allow a face-to-face interview with Jane, but she could be seen through her door window, lying watching television, chained to her minders. She spoke about her treatment via her solicitor. She said that the only time the chains had been taken off was when a doctor requested their removal for an examination. Jane, 34, who wishes to protect her identity because of her condition, was diagnosed HIV positive 10 years ago in Dublin and came to London in 1993 for treatment and care. She was arrested last November and had been held in Holloway on remand ever since. She had been in the jail's hospital wing, confined to her cell for up to 23 hours a day, until she was transferred to the specialist AIDS and HIV unit at St Mary's last Tuesday. Doctors expect that she will be there for at least another week. A spokesman for St Mary's said patient confidentiality meant that Jane's health could not be discussed. However, he added, quote, "The issue of restraint is one for the Home Office, but if the patient's condition did deteriorate at any time, then the hospital would be in communication with the Home Office to have the restraints removed." End quote. The indiscriminate cuffing and chaining of prisoners in hospital, regardless of their health or the danger they pose to the public, has been condemned by Labour, but defended by ministers both in and outside the Commons. Last week, Michael Howard, the Home Secretary, said that he had no plans to review it. However, he may be forced to. If Jane's lawyers fail in their bail application tomorrow, they are likely to challenge the policy by way of judicial review in the High Court. They will take the case to the European Court if necessary, alleging a breach of the Convention on Human Rights, which outlaws cruel, inhumane and degrading treatment. Jane's solicitor, Sarah Clary, who supplied The Independent on Sunday with copies of the photographs to be used in tomorrow's bail application, said, quote, "It is very upsetting to see ill women treated in this way. Manacles and shackles are more usually associated with medieval England or countries with appalling human rights records. I believe that the government is in flagrant breach of its obligations under the Human Rights Convention. If ministers will not listen to widespread concern over the practice, then we must resort to the courts." And above this article is a photograph of Jane. It's been cropped, so you can't see her face, in her NHS pyjamas, sat on her hospital bed, and you can see that she's handcuffed and chained. And before we hear the outcome of that application for bail on behalf of Jane, the Evening Herald on the 15th of January 1996 reports the response from the then Home Secretary, who we just heard of, Michael Howard, under the headline, "Howard faces shackles row," where they report, "The shackling of women prisoners was today defended by Michael Howard. The Home Secretary said guards had a duty to stop an increasing number of escapes. Mr Howard spoke as the Royal College of Midwives urged the prison service to end the barbaric practice of shackling pregnant women inmates during visits to hospitals. And a lawyer acting for a woman prisoner being treated in the AIDS unit of a London hospital was also due to start legal proceedings in a bid to get her chains removed. Mr Howard said he could not comment on individual cases, but said there had been 20 escapes from hospitals by women prisoners over recent years. The Home Secretary said, quote, "It was because of the growing number of escapes of women prisoners from hospitals that these measures were introduced." Speaking on the BBC's Today programme, he also said that if the medical staff said the prisoner's condition was being affected by shackles, then the restraints were removed. Prison officers are understood to be disenchanted with the policy, but have enforced it for fear of losing their jobs. Earlier, a solicitor branded inhumane the treatment of a remand prisoner suffering from HIV shackled to a prison officer while in hospital. Sarah Clary said her client, known only as Jane, was so ill that the prospect of her fleeing was ridiculous. She was being treated in a specialist AIDS unit at St Mary's Hospital, Paddington, West London, while on remand at Holloway Women's Prison. Despite her illness, she has been handcuffed to a prison officer 24 hours a day. Ms. Clary said, quote, "She's not even a convicted criminal. She is on remand. It's inhumane. It's degrading. It's making my client even more distressed and upset than she would normally be." Ms. Clary said she would be applying in court later today for bail for her client. Oh, yes, but okay, so what happened next? Well, later that same day, the Manchester Evening News was able to get the outcome of Jane's bail hearing to print in their newspaper, where they report a judge, and this is Judge Ian Davies, today refused bail to a woman AIDS virus victim who has been handcuffed in a hospital ward while on remand in custody. No, oh gosh, what on earth was he thinking? The woman, known only as Jane, is said by her solicitor Sarah Clary to be far too ill to walk more than a couple of 100 yards and would not be an escape risk. Miss Clary said she was very disappointed at the Old Bailey judge's decision. She would be taking further instructions. Reports suggest that Jane has been shackled to a prison officer in a ward in St Mary's Hospital, Paddington, West London, while awaiting a court hearing on a charge of conspiring to supply heroin. Ms. Clary had earlier condemned the practice as, quote, "incredible that in 1996 a sick woman should be treated this way," end quote. She said Jane had been crying when she spoke to her in hospital. And earlier in the day, on the 15th of January 1996, Prison Minister Anne Widdecombe stood in the House of Commons and apologised for misleading Parliament. Because in answering an urgent question a week earlier about inmates being kept in chains while in hospital, she had stated that the hospitals themselves had not raised concerns, a claim later shown to be false when letters published in the press revealed otherwise. One letter from the Whittington Hospital chief executive to Holloway's governor, dated the 3rd of August 1995, predated the controversy by almost 4 months, and a second letter from Baroness Hayman to the Health Minister, Baroness Cumberledge, dated the 4th of December 1995, likewise preceded the media exposure by weeks. Confronted with this evidence, Widdecombe told MPs in the House, "Are you ready? It's coming. Oh, I offer my unreserved apology to the House." Oh. It's my impression of Anne Widdecombe. Oh, do you know who did the best impression of Anne Widdecombe? Did anybody ever see that Christmas special with Victoria Wood?
Who's the girl who gets so giddy? I so blue and you so diddy. Who's your favourite Tory biddy?
Give me A and N and E.
W-I and double D.
E-C-O-M-B spells Widdecombe.
By day, I'm the shadow from secretary. But hey, deep down, you know there's so much more to me. I'm Widdecombe, and Widdecombe.
Right, that's enough abusing our national treasure, the Widdecombe. Back to the newspapers, because the following day, on the 16th of January 1996, many of the newspapers reported on the so-called climb down by Prison Minister Anne Widdecombe.
I'm very glad that she took the first opportunity to correct an impression which I think was damaging to the hospital, because it's very important for us that we are seen to take a view about privacy and dignity for patients.
But Miss Widdecombe's apology wasn't enough for some MPs.
It's quite significant that while the acting director says he's reviewing the arrangements, the minister simply points to the error that she made in the facts of the matter without giving any admission that her judgment was wrong.
Well, I think it's a very silly criticism. She's a very gutsy, dynamic lady, and just what we need in the prison service and in the government.
Yet, many ran the cropped photograph of Jane sitting on her hospital bed in National Health pyjamas and a handcuff and chain hanging from her wrist, where the Guardian newspaper reported. Richard Tilt, the acting Director General of the Prison Service, yesterday said he would personally review the case of the HIV-positive woman prisoner who is shackled 24 hours a day to a prison officer. An Old Bailey judge yesterday refused a bail application on behalf of the inmate from Holloway Prison, North London, known only as Jane. who is on remand in custody for allegedly smuggling heroin. She is chained by her wrist while she is in a specialist ward of St Mary's Hospital, Paddington, in West London. Her solicitor, Sarah Clary, says she is far too ill to walk more than a couple of 100 yards and would not be an escape risk. Quote, "She's fairly seriously ill but being held in unthinkable conditions. She's got tubes coming out of her. She is wearing one handcuff, attached by a very long chain to a prison officer who wears the other cuff. It's like something out of China." End quote. Mr. Tilt said last night that discretion already existed to unchain inmates if the prison authorities were satisfied that medical conditions were such that there was no risk of escape and security considerations were not paramount. It is believed Jane is charged with importing 4 grams of heroin with an estimated street value of £320. She has been on remand since November. And we hear the outcome of this second application for bail the following day. Now, bail would mean Jane's release from prison custody so that she could remain in hospital at St Mary's unshackled and without the 2 prison guards, and receive the treatment for her AIDS-related illness that she quite clearly urgently needs, and return to court to answer the charges against her when she is informed of the date and time, where the Liverpool Echo under the headline "New Bid to Cut Jane's Shackles," where they report. Lawyers for an AIDS victim who is handcuffed in a hospital ward plan to seek a judicial review of the decision to keep her chained. A second bid to obtain bail for the woman was yesterday rejected by a High Court judge. After a 20-minute private hearing, Mr. Justice Thomas refused the application made on behalf of the shackled woman, known only as Jane, who was remanded in custody on a charge of supplying heroin. An initial bid for bail was rejected by an Old Bailey judge on Monday. Jane's solicitor, Sarah Clary, said last night she would seek an emergency injunction pending an application for judicial review of the, quote, unreasonable, end quote, decision to keep her in handcuffs. Ms. Clary added that she was also, quote, seriously contemplating, end quote, suing the Home Office for damages for assault and battery. She said, quote, "Jane was shackled to a male prison officer when I visited her on Monday night. She can't even close the door when she goes to the loo. She is very miserable." End quote. Oh, I mean, I don't think... What can you say? I mean, the only thing that you can say is, and it'll probably resonate with many people as it does me, is this was 1996. For many of us, that only seems like yesterday, and they're chaining this woman up, like an animal.
Until now, ministers and the prison service had argued that while women shouldn't be restrained actually during labour, it is necessary to restrain them in hospital to avoid escapes. This morning, the Royal College of Midwives went to see the acting head of the prison service to argue that there should be a change of policy.
Although the Home Office policy is that women should not be handcuffed in labour, it's obvious that this is actually happening, and probably their definition of labour is not correct. They're thinking that labour is only when the woman's pushing the baby out. We'd like a directive to go out to say that women should not be handcuffed, quite definitely.
The prisons have a system of categorising the risk of prisoners into categories D to A, and then category A itself has 2 exceptional risk and high risk categories. I don't understand why that categorisation, which after all is used within prison, and also when judgments are made about the granting of home leave, where prisoners are not manacled, is not also used when it comes to judgment about whether a prisoner, particularly a pregnant prisoner or a prisoner with AIDS, is likely to escape if they attend hospital.
Anyhow, with 2 applications for bail to the High Court rejected, a decision that, to my mind, borders on the absurd, given that this was not a major crime and Jane had no prior convictions or history or trouble with the courts or the police, we are left awaiting news of whether Jane and her lawyer will pursue a claim against the then Home Secretary, Michael Howard, and the then Governor of the prison to seek a review of the situation of chains and shackles on prison inmates, particularly women on labour wards, or as Jane's case shows, those not even convicted but held on remand and seriously ill with an AIDS-related illness, where she is merely awaiting trial for an alleged drugs offence involving some £320 of heroin, her first alleged offence, and, it's innocent until proven guilty. And amongst the many news articles of the 18th of January 1996, it's the Guardian newspaper again that reports, Chains have been removed from the HIV-positive woman prisoner who was shackled 24 hours a day while in a specialist London hospital AIDS unit. The decision to unshackle the Holloway prison inmate known as Jane was taken after senior staff from the jail agreed with doctors at St Mary's Hospital, West London, that her medical condition outweighed the security considerations. Home Secretary Michael Howard prepares today to issue guidelines to prison governors banning the use of chains and cuffs for pregnant inmates in the hours before they give birth.
The Royal College and I have agreed to try and, between us, draft satisfactory guidelines that will lead to a change and to a more sensible arrangement that both sides are happy with.
A change which comes none too soon, according to Labour.
I will welcome any change in this grotesque and savage policy whenever it comes, but it is a sad commentary on both the incompetence and heartlessness of Conservative Home Office ministers that it's taken this kind of scandal to get any change.
Our plan is that for a prisoner giving birth or being in labour, it is not acceptable for them to be in handcuffs. It is not acceptable for them to have prison officers in the same room that they're in.
Ministers have been defending the existing policy because of concern about escapes during hospital visits, but they are now set to announce changes which will probably only allow the handcuffing of prisoners in the early stages of pregnancy. Hugh Pym, ITN, Westminster.
Jane, 34, had been handcuffed night and day to a prison officer since she was transferred to the hospital a week ago from Holloway Prison, where she was being held on remand for importing heroin. She is being treated for suspected forms of AIDS-related illnesses, including hepatitis. Her case brought angry protests, particularly because she was unconvicted. Her solicitor, Sarah Clary, had said she would seek an emergency injunction after 2 bail applications to free her client were turned down by Old Bailey and High Court judges. Oh, what a relief! But I can't help but suspect that this was perhaps a bittersweet moment for both Jane and her solicitor, because it's a case of, well, it's great, it's off, but why on earth did it take you guys such a long time to exercise a modicum of common sense, I suspect maybe I'm going to get the same feeling when I win both of my employment tribunals for HIV/AIDS discrimination. It's that thing of, why do you have to fight for these things? Why does nobody just say, hey, let's look at this again, we've got it wrong, let's sort it out. It just takes the piss, doesn't it? Anyhow, Jane's release hits newspapers up and down the country, where some of the headlines read, Woman prisoner is freed from handcuffs. HIV Jane is free from her chains. Cuffs removed from AIDS woman prisoner. AIDS prisoner is unchained. AIDS patient is finally freed from her shackles. Actually, I think there has to be something good behind those headlines, even though they're quite tabloidy, is the fact that it just highlights how barbaric, the government was. And this is sadly the last that we hear directly from Jane's case, because there appears to have been no recorded claim against the Home Office or the state for battery or breach of human rights, at least none I could find. Although Jane did reportedly wish for her full identity not to be revealed, given the enduring stigma around HIV/AIDS in 1996, the Irish Independent attempted to unmask her surname and concluded their report by noting that, quote, the bail application was made at an emergency hearing under the name of Roche, R-O-C-H-E, but lawyers said the name was incorrect, end quote. Oh, confusing, because for the Irish Independent newspaper to print that snippet, despite having already contacted Jane's solicitor to ask if that is the right name, and them saying, no, it's incorrect, doesn't make sense. Why would they print it then if it was incorrect? Unless perhaps it suggests that the journalist either had independent reason to believe the name was true or had independently verified that that was her surname. I mean, who knows? But it's unclear why the Irish Independent sought to reveal Jane's surname, or at least appeared to try, when she'd explicitly asked for anonymity. Given that stigma around HIV in 1996 compared to today, my search for a Jane Roche, a forename that itself feels suspiciously generic, perhaps a nod to Jane Doe, was intended to only trace where life took her afterwards, whether she recovered at St Mary's Hospital, accessed the then new antiretroviral therapies that began to change HIV from a terminal sentence into a manageable condition, and thereby did she become part of the shifting survival story emerging from the mid-1990s and is today, perhaps, hopefully listening to this, and is perhaps considered a long-term survivor. I mean, I do hope so. So, Jane, if it's you, drop me a line, get in touch. I'd love to hear from you. But I have to say I'm a little sceptical, given that Jane's solicitor reported that she was diagnosed with HIV in 1986 in Dublin, and 10 years on in 1996, it is understandable why she'd come to be admitted to St Mary's AIDS ward in Paddington, since the accepted average lifespan for untreated HIV at the time was around 8 to 10 years. Jane now in 1996 at the end of that known average lifespan, where an individual usually succumbs to an AIDS-related illness, is quite plausible. And I scoured the newspaper archives for the alleged November 1995 arrest for that supply of heroin charge, and I could find nothing, no court reports, no newspaper articles to be able to either verify or confirm her name. Nor could I find any reports of any court appearance or proceedings after this press coverage that we've just heard. No court appearance, no pleas, no charges, no conviction, nothing. And I also couldn't locate any death record or obituary for a Jane Roche, born in Ireland around 1962, which leaves what happened to Jane and how life spanned out for her, for us anyway, unresolved. And given I'm not able to give you a conclusive what happened next to Jane, I did wonder if I should include Jane's story in this episode, but actually I feel there is more value to Jane's story here than there is in what happened to her next. While researching this episode, I came across an article about the previous 2 episodes that we covered regarding the AIDS separation units at Arbour Hill and Mountjoy prisons over in Dublin, in which one journalist tried to argue that those involved in the protests, which were prison inmates, were not and could not be deemed activists, because in his view they lacked a formal network, such as offices, campaign materials such as leaflets and posters, a phone line. I mean, those definitions feel painfully narrow. Activism does not depend on the flashy letterhead or smart flyers or posters, but surely the one tool always available to an activist is their voice. There is no doubt that Jane wouldn't have had activist on her epitaph, but in that moment, alongside the other prison inmates, she used her voice with theirs, speaking out about the abuses they endured and in insisting on humane treatment. Their very public protests, even while chained to their hospital beds or escorting officers and disseminated through the press, forced the state to confront the issue. The women on the labour wards had long called for changes, yet it was Jane who was unshackled first, which then saw the Conservative government at the time respond, where on the 19th of January 1996, the Daily Mirror ran the headline, "The Cuffs Come Off." Humiliated, Michael Howard yesterday promised no more chains for pregnant prisoners in hospital labour wards. The outcry over the scandal forced the Home Secretary into a U-turn. Mr. Howard told the Commons, quote, "In future, no restraints will be applied to the prisoner from the time she arrives at the hospital." Shadow Home Secretary Jack Straw said the government was driven to retreat by, quote, "panic at the avalanche of bad publicity," end quote, and not by decency. And what follows that article is the thoughts of the general public, which poured into letters to the editors of their local newspapers. Judy Naylor was among them. She wrote to the Cumberland Herald, and her letter was printed on the 20th of January 1996. Sir, a few weeks ago you published a letter from a reader praising Mr. McLean as a very good Member of Parliament. As a minister in the Home Office, can Mr. McLean justify the use of chains and handcuffs for women prisoners who need hospital treatment, women who are pregnant, in labour, and who have given birth and are nursing newborn babies? A woman with HIV and hepatitis, who is on remand, not convicted, is chained 24 hours a day. Can anybody accept this appalling and degrading rule by the prison service? The people who are really degraded are those who make these shocking rules. Whatever their crimes, people do not deserve this shameful treatment. Yours, etc., Judy Naylor, Bolton, Appleby. So that's Judy's point of view, and the Manchester Evening News printed 3 letters it received on the 22nd of January 1996. The first from the George House Trust, a HIV charity, under the title No Justification, which reads, "What possible justification can be given this time by the Home Secretary? The most recent incident is of a female prisoner being shackled while in hospital to receive essential treatment related to her HIV condition. It is difficult to see what the likelihood of her escape might be. She is described as being very poorly and as having difficulty walking. It is even more difficult to see her as posing an escape threat, whatever that may mean. Yet the government continues to chain her to her hospital bed, continues to defend the policy of shackling prisoners and says it has no plans to review it. We believe there should be widespread condemnation of this policy, and we demand an end to this inhumane and cruel practice. We call on all those who are working to support people with HIV to write to the Home Secretary in order that this practice cease at once. George House Trust, Manchester." Then, to give balance, 2 letters that may or may not be similar to your own views and opinions, where the first writes, "It is about time some MPs concern themselves more with the victims of crime than with criminals' welfare. Pregnant women in jail are there because they committed a crime, and no doubt they make sure they are pregnant to get an easier sentence. What sympathy do these people give to their victims?" And he hasn't signed it with his name, but he's signed it, "Supporting victims, not criminals," from the area of Clayton. And this second letter is signed by Graham Morris from the Hyde area, where he writes, "Society has got its priorities all wrong. I'm sure I'm not in a minority in thinking that the punishment should fit the crime. In some cases, prisoners deserve to be chained up 24 hours a day, upside down in a dark room if necessary, to act as a deterrent and to prove that crime mustn't pay. Things are getting out of hand and the system is not tough enough with offenders." Where do you stand on burning them at the stake, Graham? Don't answer that. Anyhow, you'd think that that would be the end of it, that the women, their lawyers, the press, the public outcry would have ensured that the changes were permanent. But sadly, it wasn't, because the Daily Mirror again raised the same concerns, where on the 19th of December 1996, so it was still in the same year, photographs showing a mother of 2, Patricia, chained to her hospital bed, surfaced, revealing that a remand prisoner, legally innocent until proven guilty, had been restrained while undergoing surgery and post-operative recovery. Patricia, who had no previous convictions, was awaiting trial on allegations of sending threatening letters to her social worker amid a battle with depression. If you've enjoyed this episode, then don't forget to like, share and subscribe. And until next time, you can find me on Instagram at AIDS The Lost Voices.